For those of you that don't know, localism is a movement that empowers local communities by taking back the decision-making power from the centralized authority, which would be those idiots in DC in our case, and bringing it back and practicing local governance. Coalition building then becomes taking diverse groups of different types in a local area and bringing them together, uniting for shared goals and to create the change that they want to create for their communities, whether it be in the short term or even in the long term. Basically, what we're going to talk about tonight is, how can a bunch of small decentralized groups come together and fight, these huge bureaucracies of these centralized demon spawn governments like the thieves and corrupt warmongers in DC. And, so how can these groups come together and challenge those large entities and create a real impact? The answer obviously is figuring out how to do that in coalition through localism, right? The first one is localism empowers communities by placing decision-making power back in the community's hands.
Oh, strongly agree. That's the best way to go about making decisions that impact the community is with the community has to make their own decisions. That's about as far a level of bureaucratic leadership as I would want to have, if you can think about it that way too. The further you get away from a community or a township, the less accountability, the less transparency, the more opportunity for abuse of power, and all the ugly things that go with governance, right? So the more control you have over your immediate vicinity, the better off you're going to be. And I think that's just sort of self-evident, but it's sort of a lost or forgotten truth.
Communities should rely more on local governance than the federal government.
If at all possible, yes. I'd say strongly agree. That's certainly a goal worth trying to attain.
Forming coalitions within communities strengthens grassroots movements.
Absolutely. There's strength in numbers, particularly when you're talking about local governments and local, any kind of local activity or better yet, alternative to government. That's better when you have a wide range of people and a large team of people. And it's sometimes easier said than done because we're talking about people with maybe very diverse political views, especially as you go up the ladder to the higher levels of government. We might have very differing views, but when it comes down to your neighborhood or your collection of neighborhoods, it should be pretty much the same thing. Right? We should be willing to work with each other on the things that impact ourselves and our communities. So that's very true.
Localism can reduce dependence on national or global systems.
Yes, I strongly agree. It may take a while to get there, but it's, again, another thing that's worth pursuing. It's you have to sort of detangle and decouple a little bit because the larger bureaucracies that are part of the larger governing bodies that we're hypothetically going to nullify, they are kind of entrenched in our world a little bit, right? So no matter what, and particularly, again, Huntington Beach is a good example of this. A whole lot of state redistributed money, comes back through to Huntington Beach, and Huntington Beach is still reliant on that. And of course, Huntington Beach residents generally pay state income tax, so there's an entitlement to that, and that it gets sticky, right? So the decoupling from the larger governing apparatus, right, is not necessarily going to be done overnight or even over a course of years, but it is something worth pursuing. And I think that the larger the city, Huntington Beach is a pretty large city, the more difficult that's going to be, and it becomes kind of the fight of lawyers, right? You have the state attorney for California and the city attorney of Huntington Beach spend their Mondays through Fridays basically fighting each other nonstop for 2 years now. And that's just, that's part of the whole dynamic of decoupling when it's not, it's not easily done with this kind of relationship that's been established over decades upon decades, right? Or this kind of intertwining. So but it's worth pursuing. And yes, it can be done. And yes, it should be done.
Large-scale political change begins with local coalition efforts.
Absolutely true. Yes, they don't want to change anything. I think we need to understand that about mutual controlled opposition parties, so-called two major parties in the United States. It's not just the United States; it's every Western country. Just about has two power blocks that compete that are essentially mutual controlled opposition. They don't want to have any significant victory over the other because they kind of need each other to make sure that nothing ever gets accomplished and the problems perpetuate themselves. So if you're looking to the national level government to solve things, you're going to be really discouraged because it's their job to not solve things but to perpetuate problems. However, it's in the best interest of those who are affected by some sort of your local societal issue. It's in their best interest to resolve those problems. So the problem solving always begins if the real people that are interested in solving the problems, and so therefore the real problem solving begins at the local level. It's not you're not going to get it from the top down. They want the problems to continue. There's not a politician in Washington D.C. Well, maybe very few who actually want to resolve issues that, such as immigration, that want to resolve the other great societal conflicts and culture war issues. They don't want resolution. They want to perpetuate problems, continue to be able to grift of donor dollars to try to get reelected and keep the whole machine, the political machine running, and actually keep the problems ongoing rather than resolving them.
Keep the grift going. Keep the
it going.
grift going. Localism creates more accountability and responsive governance.
Absolutely. We have a lot better chance of holding those who are within our physical reach, in some cases literally accountable for how the money is spent and eventually whether we even need them as middle people at all. And that's kind of my hope. Yeah, I think that's the key. Localism would at least enable an opportunity for greater accountability.
Communities should have the power to self-govern without interference from centralized authorities.
Absolutely, but I'm going to make a little quick caveat to that. Obviously, the exception is the communities don't have the right to infringe on the individual rights of those within the community. So, if that's what's going on, then that is the only, in my opinion, the only way there should be any outside force kind of interfering, so to speak. But it's not really interfering if it's genuinely protecting the individual rights of those within that community. Now, I don't think that would be the norm, though. I think most communities don't want to see their neighbors forced to do this, that, or the other thing. Although there could be cases where that happens, that it's still less likely to happen, especially if we're building coalitions and everybody is actually getting to know one another in a real sort of way. In a nutshell, though, absolutely, communities should not be interfered with by larger governing bodies as long as those communities are respecting individual rights.
Local decision making leads to better resource management within the community.
Absolutely, yes. Again, bureaucracies are not good at that sort of thing. Bureaucracies and central planners on any scale are generally not going to be good about allocating resources. So it should be up to the people who use those resources.
Empowering local communities enhances their capacity for self-sufficiency.
Absolutely true. The self-sufficiency is the long game. Ultimately, again, I alluded to decoupling from larger bureaucracies of the larger governing bodies. Self-sufficiency would accomplish that. The sooner you get to that point where you're self-sufficient, then the better chance you have at self-governance and being able to nullify the larger governing bodies.
The next part I want to talk about here is like the historical context of it. So how did localism shape political movements throughout history? And then how did that have an impact on modern governance? The first question here is the history of localism shows its effectiveness in challenging centralized power.
The answer to that is yes. Might as well go and talk about going in the way back. Let's go way back to first and second century, and up through the third and fourth century. The world's first global dystopia was ancient Rome, and it was the early Christians who defied that by creating a parallel society and essentially decoupling and removing itself and creating a whole separate society. They outlasted and essentially undermined the world's first dystopia, and I think we need to follow that example. Whether you're a believer or not, it's a good example to follow. They detached and formed their own communities, and I think it's really interesting and compelling that right around the time the world was sort of reenacting the Roman Empire during the COVID lockdowns in 2020, that there was also a discovery in Turkey of these ancient cities, completely underground, self-sustaining cities that were once occupied. Some of them maybe predated even the early Christians, but were once occupied by early Christians escaping the persecution of Rome and other threatening pagan societies and whatnot. I think that's an interesting and compelling example, kind of telling, but it gives me hope for this idea of township liberation, because it's not a new concept. And yeah, like I said, they outlasted and undermined the world's first global dystopia, and I'm hoping that following that example will enable us to outlast and undermine the current global dystopia, which is very real and very much already here.
Localism played a crucial role in the development of democratic societies.
Yes, now we're talking about my father's ancestors in Greece. Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the city state, right? That's it's not a bad idea. Aristotle got some things right. Plato got a couple things right, and it's not the end all be all, but it is another interesting historical example. Again, we're going way back.
The centralization of power has often been met with resistance from local movements.
I would like to think so. There's some interesting periods of American history. The Whiskey Rebellion comes to mind. Another thing, my father's from Pittsburgh, and of course, the Whiskey Rebellion is kind of centered around the Pittsburgh area in the late 1700s. But there certainly is several examples you could point to where there was some local resistance that didn't pan out so well, and other cases where it did. But yeah, I think there is an instinct to resist centralized power from afar.
Historical localist movements have led to significant political reforms.
Yes, so the Irish Republican Army, like it or not, and it breaks my heart that they were more influenced by socialism and Marxism than by Thomas Paine and the American revolutionaries, but also yeah, they were relatively successful in what they accomplished. I mean, they started as a localized paramilitary outfit using cells that oftentimes didn't know what the other cell was doing, so it was highly decentralized. And although I don't necessarily approve of the methods, I do think it was an example of a successful, um, yeah, it's a successful example of localism, turning the tables on a very close proximity, unlike the United States or the colonies were British Empire. So I think there's something to be said for that. I don't, like I said, why I was really hesitant to bring this up as an example is because, of course, I'm pursuing the other type of thing other than violence. I'm not talking about armed revolution or anything like that. I'm talking about nullification, essentially focused civil disobedience. So I'm careful about even bringing this up as an example, but since you're talking about history, there's an example of a localized force that eventually achieved something fairly significant.
The impact of localism on political structures has been largely positive.
Absolutely, because it puts the larger political structures in check. When it fails to do that, at least it serves as an indictment of the larger governing body, like a sort of a stain forever on history. To go back to the Whiskey Rebellion, I mean, sure, George Washington was heroic in many ways, but boy, did I wish he handled that differently when he was president. Same for the Shays Rebellion, for that matter. So even when those localized efforts, and again, I don't think it's by accident those were of a violent nature. Even when they're not successful, it makes a historical indictment on the centralized power, right? Because to me, it's forever, at least to me, being a liberty-minded individual, that's forever like an asterisk and a footnote, and that's sort of a negative mark or a negative footnote in George Washington's administration was how those were handled. So yeah, I'd say that in general, even when it's not successful,
centralized governance threatens the autonomy historically fought for by local communities.
absolutely. Yeah, no matter what you have, centralized power, it's going to be sort of siphoning off the strength and the energy, not to mention the autonomy of everything under that it claims to have dominion over, right? So any local governing body is going to be suffering from the larger governing body. It's going to be sort of existing at the local governing body is going to be subservient to this larger governing body, and it's not usually going to go as well, right? They're going to eventually be bled dry as the larger governing body becomes more parasitic. Let me tell you, we're there, by the way. We're there in the United States. We're there in every Western society right now. Every Western government has kind of become a parasite to its smaller governing bodies, to its individual citizens. And yeah, I think that's the inevitable way of things as centralized power only seeks to get more of itself and increase its centralization and increase its power.
Would an example be the National Guard in each state, Mike?
I would hope so. I mean, I obviously I'm a big fan of Defend the Guard, and I would think there's some opportunity there. Again, I'm hoping for nullification is the means to bring the federal government and our centralized powers to heel. But yeah, I think the National Guard has a great deal of potential to kind of balance the power, so to speak, within the United States, one would hope.
To go a little further in that, you're basically saying that that would be, local nullification or state nullification by saying that the federal government can't send the the National Guard or the State Guard to a foreign country like they did now when they're unable to help the flood victims.
That's correct. I think and the sad fact is it requires nullification at all because it shouldn't be happening, right? One of the really sort of noxious things about even needing to practice nullification is that most of the things that we're trying to nullify should never have come about to begin with. And that's one of the more sort of frustrating things about what I'm advocating is that a lot of it shouldn't have ever been, it should never have arisen to be challenged anyway. It just never should have happened. So, and I'm not here to like be all Lysander Spooner against the Constitution, but I do think it's pretty obvious that the Constitution is readily the values in it, right? It gets it just gets more and more overridden by the actions of our centralized power. So yes, we have to nullify, and it's unfortunate we even have to do that because if our government actually followed its constraints that were outlined in the original Bill of Rights, this would never gotten to this point.
The centralized power gets its power from the local people and its money.
That's right. Of
We're
course,
sending all of our money there.
they extract the very life. I use the term parasite on purpose because they extract our livelihoods, and they change things around to benefit their power structure at our expense, at the expense of the citizens, the expense of we the people.
We want to talk about the benefits of local governance and keeping control in the community. How does that control, the community control, retaining that power or taking that power back from the federal government? How does that enhance efficiency but also accountability? We spend a lot of time talking about DC doesn't listen to us and they don't have our best interest at heart and they care more about foreign countries and foreign wars and
True.
the military industrial complex than they do about us. How does local governance solve that? So I want to I have to ask you a question first. Come on, man. Come on.
I got you.
All right. Local governance results in more efficient use of resources. Now you can go.
Oh yes, absolutely.
I'll even give you the whole stage here.
The fact is, the people that use the benefit from the use of those resources should be the ones making the decision about those resources, and that's shockingly not the case in far too often. I think that's really a big reason why we need to decentralize, right? We need to reassert power over the resources that we ourselves utilize and not let larger governing bodies dictate to us how to use the resources that we know good and well, and that the township and the people in it would know better how to utilize and know how to best manage those resources as well.
Community control leads to policies that better reflect local needs.
The local needs are things that only the local people should be commenting on and making decisions about. So yeah, the further you get away from the people that are the recipients of whatever is supposed to be done, the less likely it's going to be done efficiently or to the benefit of the intended recipient.
Localism encourages citizens to participate more in active governance.
Absolutely, yes. And one I think will lead to the other too. I mean, once it's almost, you have to sell it a little bit, but once people get comfortable with the idea that they are directly responsible for what happens in their local governing body, then they'll get they'll get a taste of it and get that much closer to self-governance, right? That's really kind of like the long game for this, is to make people ready for self-government.
Communities that control their own policies tend to be more adaptable.
Absolutely, yes. And this kind of goes back to your disaster relief question from earlier. Who better to know? I mean, again, there's also like the surprise thing, but most communities want to have the rainy day. I can't think of it. There's no place in the country that's like disaster free. I mean, it's the Midwest tornadoes, it's hurricanes in the Gulf, it's earthquakes, here where I live, and there's all sorts of other potential disasters that face every community. Why not let them decide how much goes, and the people that live there, how much goes into the emergency fund, the rainy day fund, as you call it? Why not give them that autonomy instead of having it dictated from on high by a giant government bureaucracy from the top down? That's the other biggest problem of central planning is it's always one size fits all. Hence the failure of the Department of Education and anything of that type. I mean, if anything, everything just needs to be bottom line. Everything just needs to be restructured from the bottom up.
local communities are more innovative when they have control over their own decisions.
Yes, because
That's where your blockchain would come in too, right?
exactly. Well, and not only that, but any sort of innovation. There's no reason why innovation. There's no reason why several places across the world can't be just like Silicon Valley. There's no reason why there can't be incredible developments, entrepreneurial developments, technological developments happening everywhere. It doesn't need to be centralized in one location. The only reason why it's centralized so heavily in Silicon Valley is so concentrated is kind of by design, because that's preferable. Let's just say it's preferable for the governing body in DC to have it in one spot. It's certainly preferable for Sacramento, but it doesn't have to be that way. We can decentralize that across great distances in several different locations across the country, across the world. And why not? There can be lots of micro Silicon Valleys. I think there's incredible potential for that, even in some of the places you wouldn't think of ordinarily. But I'm looking forward to watching that just kind of occur organically.
Want to talk about identifying common goals for diverse groups? How do what's the secret to uniting different groups around a single cause? How do they identify common goals that's going to make that coalition successful? So identifying common goals is the most critical step in building a successful coalition.
I'm going to give a qualified yes to that. Because
I wanted to get one that you pushed back on, so I'm happy about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to give a qualified yes to that, because I think of equal and slightly greater importance is language. In order to be a successful coalition, you've got to become at least bilingual. And I don't mean like you need to all take Greek lessons and learn to speak Greek or Irish Gaelic or anything like that. I'm talking about the language that each sort of political tribe uses is different, and it's a bit different almost by design. It's certainly part of the tool of the ruling class, so to speak, to make sure that we're divided and conquered, and they've gone out of their way to make sure we speak a different language, and also kind of have a different echo chamber to reinforce that language. Not to sound too paranoid, but that's by design. We have to overcome the language differences, right? We have to be able to speak their language, whoever that other tribe is. We have to learn to speak their language a little bit, learn that certain things mean different things. And we've talked about this free offline. Decentralize even scares people, right? And I thought it was a great word. It became my last name. I thought it was a great word, but as you pointed out, that still may not work for certain people. So we may have to be willing to go the extra mile and explain what this means so that it becomes non-threatening to somebody that doesn't, in their language, it means something different and more threatening. So that's a huge thing. So, but yes, we can identify mutual goals, and I honestly believe that most people, not all, but most people are looking for a non-dystopian alternative. I would say at least a tireless minority, but certainly I think at least that, if not more, at the local level, would be agreeable to a non-dystopian solution, we'll call it. But you also have to be able to speak their language. You have to be able to bypass their baggage that they may have with the language that you use. I see this a lot because as we round the corner towards the actual election day here in the United States, the rhetoric machine is at full blast, right? And it is completely reinforcing the language of the two primary tribes at work, and it's by design. It's to stir up the machine, make sure that the outcome is least predictable for the two mutual controlled opposition parties. So the idea is we have to break through those lines and those language barriers, and we also have to recognize definitions of words are even kind of suspect and have been redefined. That's a huge manipulation tactic that the ruling classes have had for millennia. That takes a concentrated effort to try to break through that. But if you can be a pleasant person, you can find people who will be patient with you while you learn their language, and vice versa. Then you can actually build that coalition effectively and achieve that common goal. If you don't mind me going on a dive, that's actually pretty important, though. I think language is a lost, just like civil discourse. Language itself has been sabotaged and has been undermined. So we have to go out of our way now to sort of redefine certain words and to arrive on the same page and learn to speak another language, essentially.
Diverse groups can find shared objectives when they focus on mutual benefits.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Mutual benefit is one of the One of the great things about this nation, a polyglot nation, was created, right? And I touched on this a little bit in Arrival of Common Sense, because we're a polyglot nation, even from the beginning. And yeah, of course, there were some horrible practices where a huge, significant portion of the population was here by force and coercion. Speaking of force and coercion, but like it or not, we became a polyglot nation, even in spite of our many sort of mistakes and foibles. And that's pretty also one of the many unique things about the United States. But yeah, mutual benefit is what made the polyglot nation possible, because no one else is going to achieve as much mutual benefit in any other part of the world. I think it's still relatively true, although you can kind of trade off some other things and maybe achieve even greater mutual benefit depending on the country. But from a polyglot nation achieving the mutual benefit, that's our thing. I think we got that right, and I think for the most part we're still getting that right for the most part. That we can get government out of the way.
Coalitions are more effective when members have clearly defined common goals.
Yes, that goes back to my long diatribe about language, the importance of language. Clearly defined means you've transcended the language barriers of the various groups, and there's usually more than two, right? So I say bilingual, but really there's probably more languages involved. But if you can transcend that, then you can define a goal. You can define the goal more clearly. Everybody knows what they're looking at. Everybody knows what to focus on, and everybody wins in the achievement.
Even groups with differing ideologies can unite around shared objectives.
In my heyday of activism in the Libertarian Party was in the 1990s, up to about early 2000, 2001. But I worked with other groups around issues, right? I worked with, back then, the political left was actually anti-war, believe it or not. Back then, the political left was actually anti-surveillance state. Back then, the political left was actually anti-censorship. Back then, the political left was anti-drug war. Some of them still are today. But that was what the political left looked like. And I worked with those guys passionately on those topics locally, on those specific issues. I worked with the political right on gun rights, ending the income tax, other kind of related things related to economic liberty, economic freedom, and deregulation, and basically removing red tape and whatnot, anti-bureaucracy. I work with the political right on those issues. Those guys were great to work with too. They were, heck, in the 90s, I think they were a little more consistent on those things than they are today. Certainly more so than the neocons are. It's entirely possible, right? Although I think the left is really sold out, shockingly, to dystopia more so than the right. Again, when I was cutting my teeth on libertarian activism in the 90s, it was the right that was pro-war. Now it's like kind of both, with the exception of the MAGA right. So the landscape has definitely changed and shifted a little bit. And I'd say that overall, I mean, like it or not, I wasn't predicting this, but over the last 15 years, it seems the political left, the established political left, has become more dystopian even than the political right, unless you're talking about, again, the neocon wing of the political right, which is neck and neck in terms of dystopianism. If you find the people who are pursuing a decidedly pro-liberty issue that may not agree with you, in the example of the 90s political left, I wasn't going to agree with these guys about guns or taxes or any of those kind of things. Making sure the United States doesn't get involved in any foreign wars, absolutely, we're on the same page. Ending the war on drugs, absolutely on the same page. And vice versa. I wasn't going to agree with the conservatives about ending the drug war, or at that time anyway, not having U.S. military presence all over the world. But we certainly fought for Second Amendment rights and gun rights. We certainly fought together for income tax and various things pertaining to economic liberty. It's entirely possible to do that.
Would you prioritize coalitions focused on short-term, high-impact goals, or coalitions focused on long-term, sustained change?
Short-term, actually.
Is it better for coalitions to form organically from grassroots efforts, or to be strategically organized by leadership?
I'm going to go with it because I'm such a decentralist. I'm going to have to go with organic, but I think there's something to be said for having some leadership.
I almost dropped the F-bomb there. Screw that. Nope, screw that.
Yeah, no, organic. Yeah, I think organic's probably the better way to go, because even though I know how to kind of lead, I lead by organic, right? It's like I can kind of like drop the suggestion and then let something happen organically around that. So even the best leaders are kind of allow for organic to happen.
All right. Should coalitions focus on immediate policy reform, or gradual cultural shifts?
It's the more of the societal change, the long-term shift, the paradigm shift.
Is it more effective for coalitions to mobilize through local campaigns or use national platforms to amplify their messages?
I'd say, although national is always important for messaging, I'd say local campaigns is where it's at, because it's again, everything, all politics is local. I'll just go with that cliche as my reason for that answer.
Do coalitions gain more power by partnering with influential organizations or remaining entirely independent?
Okay, when in doubt, I'd say independent. I say that's got to be the fallback.
I would definitely do independent because I think it's easy to mobilize. If you have a good idea, if you have a good
Right.
message, you have good, leadership, for lack of a better term, it's easy to organize. For societal change, is it better to have coalitions that are focused on one core issue or coalitions that tackle multiple related issues? And you can talk as long as you want this time because I'm trying to plug this thing in.
I got a success with single issues. It kind of depends on the purpose. Like if your coalition is to, for example, elect a slate of candidates to a city council, then obviously that's a multi-issue purpose, right? So there's multiple issues involved with that. But if your other issue is simply to counteract a unconstitutional gun ordinance coming out of your state capital, then that's a single issue. Then it would make sense. So I would say it's easier, not necessarily better, but easier to center around a single issue, unless we're talking about a coalition that's meant to elect candidates to office or a candidate to office.
Is it more productive for coalitions to target specific legislative actions or to focus on changing public opinion?
At this point, I'm going to say specific legislative actions. There's so many specific legislative actions that are crushing our individual liberty. They become a teaching tool in and of themselves, right? At least I would think we could use them that way. We could use this as a means to defend ourselves and educate the public, right, against this anti-liberty legislative action. So it becomes a teaching tool regardless, if we do it right. So I'm going to go with legislative action.
Do coalitions build trust faster through small, frequent actions or larger, high impact projects?
I'd say the small, because it creates a body of experience, a body of action, which is just as potent as any so-called large action.
Is it better to align coalition members on shared values or tangible policy outcomes?
Shared values, I'm going to say, because it's principles that matter ultimately, right? And I think most people can align in a coalition, even when they speak different languages from different tribes, if they put aside their particulars and realize they share the same fundamental principles. The principles that even instinct, you may not know what they even are. Maybe you can't even necessarily articulate them, but at least you can kind of feel that these are the principles that made great nation, this great polyglot nation. The founding principles of the country may not necessarily even be known, because God knows they're not taught in our government schools, but we can demonstrate them. And that, I think, is more the unifying glue. It's not so much the particulars. It's the fact that we ultimately kind of believe that there's some founding principles to this that unify us more than divide us. Founding principles to this nation, and to the the principles specifically of individual liberty that founded the framework of this country that we live in. We may have some differing views that emerge out from and beyond those principles. We may have different particulars, but we share the same principles. I think that's what we're going to find when we build these coalitions.